built up in your lifetime and the wealth that you've accumulated could flee so quickly, at the wrong hands and wrong planning. So tell a little bit, start out from the basics as to why you need an elder law attorney when handling these affairs.
Absolutely. Like you just said, Jen, it's an area that's, it's riddled with it's a minefield if you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. The days of going to your local attorney who's been practicing in town for years, great guy, great woman, but you can't go visit somebody for a jack of all trades. And what's really interesting and what's really helpful in the practice in the profession, actually, many attorneys actually are recognizing this now. It used to be that you could walk into any attorney's office and if you were a general practitioner, they would take whatever work came in their way, because that was the essence of a general practitioner's practice. We tell our clients all the time, you don't want to walk into somebody's office who does, real estate today, bankruptcy tomorrow, divorce the next day, and at some point draft somebody's will, for a Medicaid plan, right? And, countless times over and over again, we can show you, not that the attorney's not a good attorney, right? And we've got a lot of friends that are general practitioners that send us, plenty of business. But it's impossible to be up to date and astute on all the concepts that are in this practice area.
It's true. It's a multifaceted area. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of loopholes. And when we talk about you hit the hot word of Medicaid, I want to talk about that and how that transition to Medicaid could happen, because there is such a thing as a look back period where you can be as healthy as a horse at 75, have a fall at 76, and it changes the course of your health, and you're still considered relatively young. But it's a life-changing event that just sets this ball in motion, plummeting down the hill. And if you don't have the proper channels in place, everything that you worked a lifetime for could just vanish before your eyes. Everything that you had hoped to preserve for generational wealth could just dissipate before your eyes. So I want to talk about what brings a person to Medicaid. When does this discussion come up? What are some of them? I mean, there's still a lot of qualifications, too many to list. But what brings us to that realm of Medicaid?
Right. And I'd like to just add another element, which is a little bit more of an emotional factor. If you don't have your affairs in order, if you have not taken the time to work with an elder law / estate planning attorney, you could be causing your family a tremendous amount of grief.
Absolutely.
And I don't mean grief in your sense as a funeral director.
No, but I think it's compounded grief too if you passed away. Yeah,
it is.
Absolutely.
It's the anxiety that I see families enduring because their loved ones, their father, their mother, their spouse hasn't taken the time to draft something as simple as a power of attorney.
Right.
If we have to if there was one message that I can get across to our audience over and over again, that I hope at some point resonates, is to come in and sit down and talk about these things. But to answer your question, I love that commercial on TV. I don't think it's on TV anymore where they say a heart attack, a stroke doesn't tap you on the door and say, hey, we're coming at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon.
That's not the falling and can't get up one.
No. It's a more recent one where it's like there's a note. The guy gets a note that says you're going to have a heart attack at 2:00, right? So nobody gets any advanced notice.
It's a good commercial.
It's a great commercial.
Powerful message.
I don't want to plagiarize. Well, plagiarize is not the right word because it's not in writing. But I don't want to. That would be a great commercial for us.
It's very true because you know not the moment. But again, there's a difference between the crisis setting in and here's the activate the plan, the emergency response plan, versus let's create the plan during the crisis.
One good thing about the COVID environment that we live in right now is more and more people are coming into the office because they're worried about the unknown.
Well, it's a mindfulness issue. It's just made you aware of things. And also, I mean, COVID created the additional difficulty of the physical barriers. Now you can't get into these hospitals with your loved ones. So that raises the issue of healthcare proxies, advanced directives, living will.
That's right.
Who can actually speak for you because you can't communicate, So it really begs the need for, do you have an advocate? Do you have fiduciaries? Do you have trusted, appointed people acting in these various capacities? because the what if scenarios are not that far fetched anymore.
They're not, and the way it happens to ultimately answer your question is that everything is going going great. Everybody just celebrated Christmas and is sitting around the Christmas table, and then 2 weeks later somebody has a stroke. And they're incapacitated, and the family is just in disbelief, trying to deal with hot doctors and the medical care of their loved one. And there's no documents in order. There's no healthcare proxy. And then the person hopefully it can be rehabilitated, but maybe needs a nursing home stay. And so then they come to us because the next thing that hits them in the back of the head is the cost of a nursing home. And the nursing home says, how are you going to pay us?
Yep. Give a rough, throw a number out. Obviously it varies depending on the facility. Like anything in life, there are varying costs associated to the level of facility and care, but throw some mean number out. $15,000
to $18,000 a month.
Monthly, okay.
A month. People need to hear that.
They do, and then they need to back that up by the second misconception that Medicare, that their general Medicare is going to absorb it, because am I correct that there's 100-day?
It's 100 days. So when we sit with people, I usually start the conversation by saying to somebody, can we agree that you may get sick someday? And obviously the answer is yes. You always get somebody that's a smarty pants that wants to try to tell me no, but the answer is yes. And then if we can agree that you can get sick someday, can we agree that there's a possibility? I'm not saying that that you will, but there's a possibility that you could end up in a nursing home. And the answer is obviously yes. So the next question is, how are you going to pay for it? And most people just stare at me blindly because the common mentality is to just ignore it, and it may not happen.
Avoidance is a very good tactic, Sal.
Right. I'll deal with it later. My kids will deal with it. No, that's not good.
That's the worst scenario.
That's the worst.
That's the worst answer.
And there's only 4 ways to pay for your care. So you either pay for it out of your own pocket, which is $15,000 to $18,000 a month, which, by the way, the average stay is 2.5 years, they say. And I would say over the course of my 20-something years of practicing, that's probably true, right? Then you could, if you have long-term care insurance, that's another option.
But are there a lot of barriers to that?
There could be. I'm an advocate for looking into long-term care insurance. I don't sell it. I find that most people think it's costly. Some people can't get it for health concerns. But if you're at, I guess if you're in a particular age bracket, you should look into it.
And I'm assuming that's an age bracket that's much younger than the person who
I would say in your 60s.
Okay, that's actually a little older than I would have.
Well,
thought.
I would think that's probably it's going to get pretty expensive after that.
Okay.
And then the third and fourth options are Medicare and Medicaid.
So would you agree that that's what most often brings us into the Medicaid discussion, is when we have a need for skilled nursing, a need for care?
Yes, and home care, right? A lot of people don't realize that Medicaid pays for care at home.
I think that's very important, because I think home care is becoming the natural preference. There's a movement in this country, aging in place, and the comfort and familiarity of your surroundings. And especially nowadays when people know these concerns, that these physical barriers to admissions in nursing facilities because of COVID, which don't seem to be lifting, you're going to want your loved one where you have access to walk in and out that front door and see them. So I can only imagine the shift is even going more so in that direction. And they recognize that, because now you see Medicaid laws for home care that never existed before.
That's right. We
always catch on.
We don't want to put people in nursing homes if we don't have to. And obviously, I don't put people in nursing homes. I just help people pay for it. But home care is clearly the first option. You can have a loved one take care of you at home, and Medicaid can pay for it. There are particular programs out there that Medicaid, allows for your loved one to take care of you. And
that circles back to the need for somebody who's well-versed in the field, because, again, so many loopholes.
And the problem that we see out there is that, if you try to, it's very difficult to do a Medicaid application on your own, even though you're supposed to be able to, right? It's a government program. It's government entitlements.
It's very difficult.
But it's very difficult. And there are people out there, there are non-attorneys that do Medicaid applications.
I hate to say, and I don't mean to say it pejoratively, but the social workers who could be very well intentioned, that's great, but this is a different skill set than they
That's right.
It's not
and
their wheelhouse.
Some of them are good. I have great relationships with some of them, but I'll give you a great example of why it makes sense to work with an attorney, spend the money. If a non-attorney comes into the room and wants to do a Medicaid application at home, they can't do any of the legal planning surrounding that application. So they could do the Medicaid application and get you eligible for Medicaid at home. But then what are they doing about the house?
Exactly.
And so, I wrote an article about this years ago where, somebody needed home care at home and a social worker did the application and everybody was happy. They saved a lot of money in legal fees and Medicaid was granted and the caregiver was in place. Then the person died. And when the person died, the house had to go through the probate process. And what our audience and our listeners probably don't know is that Medicaid has a claim against the probate estate. And there are ways to avoid this claim against the probate estate, but it requires an attorney to draft documents, such as a trust.
Right.
A social worker or a non-attorney cannot do this.
And I think a trust is such an important vehicle. And Sal, to add to your list of expertise, you're an accountant, so you're well versed in tax laws. You're well versed you have a wonderful mix of legal and tax knowledge, but the trust is arguably a more important vehicle than a will.
Absolutely. I just wrote a blog about that about 2 months ago.
Look at that. Nice
yeah.
segue.
See, you're so smart. People come into my office all the time. And by the way, listeners, we did not plan that, right? That was not a planned transition between you and
I'm not that quick on a Monday morning, so I should be able to finish your sentences now, but I can't.
People come into the office all the time and they sit in front of me and they say, I want to get my affairs in order. And I'll say, okay, what does that mean to you? And they'll say, well, I want to draft a will. And I'll say, the will is the last thing that I actually want to talk about.
That's so funny because I'm sure 20 years ago that would have been a different conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's probably still the conversation with non-elder law attorneys. And there we go. We're tying it all together, right?
Yep.
If you go to a non-elder law attorney and you sit down in front of that person and say, I want to get my affairs in order, they're going to draft you a will. And they're probably going to draft you a boilerplate power of attorney and a healthcare proxy. And you really didn't do much except for maybe the power of attorney, depending on how that's drafted. A last will and testament, if you and I are married and I die, my assets are going to you under New York state law. If we have kids, my assets are going to you and our kids. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, the state doesn't come in and take the assets because you don't have a will.
Well, no, because in New York, they recognize an elective share in the spouse. So even if you did, as my husband, not put me in your will,
it's before the elective share is if I disinherited you.
Exactly.
Before that, there's a statutory will in New York State that says your wife, your kids, they get the assets.
Yes.
So
it's not going to escheat back if there's no heirs or heirs apparent there. Nope. Yeah, absolutely.
So the message that I give to everybody is that dying is not the problem.
Dying with assets.
I'm going to get coffee mugs made up. I've been saying that for the last 2 years. Everybody makes fun of me in my office. It's going to say plan today for tomorrow, which is my marketing
What kind of mug are you going to think that
It's going to be a nice white mug with a blue logo that says plan today for tomorrow. And on the other side, it's going to say dying is not the problem.
It's going to be like a soup bowl, like a big cup of coffee. I don't know how that's going to look on my desk, though. Dying is not the problem. Don't sign me up for one. No, but dying with assets is the problem. And what the trust does is basically secure. It puts this protective barrier and encasement around what you have. And I'll let you talk about the schematic of that. I think part of the problem, too, is aging people need to there's a psychological and emotional component that you tend to feel life is taking so much away from you just in general. And I'm sure you've seen that feeling of, I don't want my assets taken away as well. And part of what you do is probably to coach them through. It's not getting taken away. Yeah. It's making sure that it's here long after you go.
Exactly. But the process starts with trying to protect your assets while you're alive.
Correct.
Right. So, I like to tell people that, dying is not a problem. It's planning for disability. Right. I call it, the space between. Mm-hmm. Right. The period of time, let's say I'm working with a 70-something-year-old. The period from now until death, and we don't know when death is, right? But that period of time, so many different things can happen. And if if the wrong things happen, we could lose your assets to the cost of your care. That's why I say dying's not a problem, because dying doesn't lose your assets.
Correct.
Becoming disabled and not having the right power of attorney or not having a trust loses your assets.
Absolutely, because the disability is going to create the need for the care, and then funding the care is going to create this quandary for people. So when you're talking about, so we understand now that when we're speaking of Medicaid, there's been some type of triggering event, change in the course of health that's requiring long-term care needs. Then there becomes this issue of how do we pay for it? And you laid out the options there of private pay, long-term care insurance, Medicare, which is short-term only.
It's only 100 days.
Which leads you to Medicaid. Okay, so now we're talking about Medicaid. How do we qualify? It is an income qualification, an asset qualification. So we have to now do the spend down or the transfer of assets. Let's talk about that area when we're at the door of Medicaid trying to get in, but we have assets in our name.
Well, so just we could talk about the at the door or the last minute planning, but really it's worth noting that the pre-planning is what we're talking about here. The
Yes,
use of
what
trust, right?
Correct. So instead of saying at the door, it's the possibility that we
Right,
might be at that
right.
door. So
So-
what do we do in advance? Because Medicaid's not going to allow you to make these changes overnight and create these
Right.
vehicles overnight and say, oh, look at me, I'm Medicaid eligible.
That's right. So the most common planning technique is the drafting of a trust, and I don't think we could do another show on just the type of trust that we're talking about, but it's an irrevocable trust, and we refer to that as a Medicaid trust, right? So somebody that comes in and says, Sal, I get it. I heard you speaking with Jen, or one of my friends used you, or I read your articles and I've been on your website, whatever. I get it. I have to do something. A will is not enough. So we're going to talk about what we call a Medicaid trust. And we're going to pretty much talk about transferring your house into a trust, maybe other assets. And we'll go through the different types of assets that are exempt and non-exempt. But there's a 5-year look-back period. So you can't apply for Medicaid for the 5-year period after we do this. So it begs the question, like, when do I do this? Well, you got to get in early.
Absolutely, because as I mentioned earlier, you could have a fall one day,
Right.
and again, in your early 70s, it changes the course of health. And one day you're fine until one day you're not.
That's
so
right.
the time to really do this, and that's sometimes the hardest thing to reconcile, is when you're your happiest and healthiest and the world is just spinning.
Or you lose your capacity and you never did your power of attorney, and now I can't do the trust either.
That's very true.
Right? It's such a trickle-down effect. What if you have a stroke and you lost your capacity? Or what if you have dementia or Alzheimer's? And again, you didn't.
And you're not of sound mind and body.
That's right.
So how can you? Is that when a guardianship
That's when
comes
a guardianship comes into play. And these are the examples of when I say the anxiety and the stress that families have to endure. It's hard enough to work or to deal with a loved one who's got, diminished capacity, or who, God forbid, had a stroke or a heart attack or something that's debilitating. That's hard enough, right? Because like we said before, it usually hits you when you're not expecting it. It changes your entire world. You don't need all this stuff on top of it.
No, not at all.
And it's sad because if you would just take the time to come meet with us, and it doesn't have to be me, it could be somebody that's competent, right? That's the message also that we want to get out there.
Well, it should be an elder and estate planning.
It's got to be somebody
who's
that
in
does
that
this.
realm.
But you could really save your family a lot of troubles.
You've referenced articles that you've written, and I know you blog on the subject frequently. You've written articles even for my publication. Very well done. I'd like to be able to direct people to your website. Are all the articles, or do you have a section for your blog?
Yeah, for the most part.
All right. I'm going to let you give the website because I struggle with this all the time, but go ahead.
Plan today for tomorrow. Remember the
all
coffee
spelled
mug?
out?
Yep.
I do, but is it for the number?
Nope. Plan today for tomorrow. One big word.
Well, I listen, it's catchy, but it really is
It
a great.
It is.
I tease you because it's lengthy, but it's a very, very good name. Plan today for tomorrow.
You should be going on it so frequently that when you type in P, it comes up.
Just you know what? It's been a while. New year. I got to get back to stalking your website. But I do encourage everybody to take a look because there's really important information there, and you can connect to Sal as well. And many people who do hear you on air, contact you after, because the light bulbs go off. And January, again, it's the perfect time to have you and a health expert on, because everyone's in that mindset.
There's absolutely no reason to not sit down with an elder law estate planning. I mean, I tell people all the time in my office, you need an accountant, possibly a financial planner, you need a doctor, a funeral director, and you need an elder law estate planning attorney, who, by the way, used to be like the family attorney. You know, back in the old days when you'd hear about the attorneys that come into the house, and, you know, that's pretty much like what the practice has become.
But again, it's just you're so specialized in this field. And Medicaid laws keep changing. Even, did New York ever change the power of attorney form? Because you came in to talk about
last
that.
Summer.
So these, you know, things are changing, and people think you can go on LegalZoom or, you know, DIY, be your own attorney. You can be your own advocate, but you can't be your own attorney.
Absolutely not.
I try to be my own doctor, but that doesn't really serve me well either. But no, in something like this, you just have too much to lose. And I think you illustrate the point very well, that now you have your children or your loved ones trying to care for you physically and address the fact that you're now sick or there's been a change in your health, which brings about its own set of emotional issues and complications. And now you compound it with, what do I do?
You're really doing this for your family.
It's a selfless act. And I always say that when people come in to pre-plan a funeral, it's got to be one of the hardest things that you can do. And you're sitting there literally face-to-face contemplating your mortality.
You can do.
But when I sit down to make an arrangement with adult children where I can say, okay, this is what mom and dad wanted, it's such a different conversation than what would mom and dad have wanted.
Well, how many times has somebody come back? I mean, it's happened in my practice a million times. Thank you so much for sending me to Jen. Thank you so much for telling me to do this. It takes that. It's about chipping away at the block of anxiety.
Very true.
And there's pre-planning a funeral, although it sounds, you know, like people are like, I don't want to deal with this. If they do it, now the family could just grieve.
That's right. You have nothing left to do but experience the loss and go through that process. And you don't have to second guess yourself, because it's hard to make decisions, you know, when you're clouded in your judgment. So the message today is to plan today for tomorrow, and visit that website, plantodayfortomorrow.com. Sal Di Costanzo, offices in Southern and Northern Westchester, and always available to meet and answer all of your questions on planning ahead. So thank you, Sal.
Thank you, Jen.
You definitely, you earned your seat back. And you're right, we totally can do a show just about a trust vehicle.
We could do a lot of topics.
And I hope that is the takeaway today, that there is a need to explore this. Everybody puts it off. They say, you know, they'll say, oh, I've been meaning to do it, but why not plan today for tomorrow and give Sal a call? Read his blogs. I'm sure one of the topics there will resonate with you. And are you doing in-person meetings with clients?
Yep, full schedule.
You can still go in. Do you do virtual meetings with clients as well?
Both.
And, you know, even though time is crunched, I think that's also very important. With COVID, again, getting affairs in order, healthcare proxies, you know, don't assume that your husband or wife are going to be able to take you to a hospital, to walk into an emergency room with you. You're pretty much on your own. So not only have your documents, prepare them, but locate them, have them tangible.
And deliver them to your banks and your physicians.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, there's all these little tidbits that we could talk about, but if somebody does a power of attorney, they should put that on file with their bank.
Yes. And make the people, you know, make people aware, the people you've appointed, make sure that they're on board and they know and they have access to everything. There's so much we can talk about. But again, I refer you back to the website. You're on Facebook as well, under that same Plan Today for Tomorrow. Sal Di Costanzo, and your number is 914-921...
925.
925.
1010.
925-1010. Thank you, Sal.
Thanks, Jen.
I appreciate it. And this is Jen Graziano thanking you for taking the time to listen as we took the time to talk. Have a great day, Westchester. Bye-bye.